What's going on, everybody? Nick Whalen, Joe Bartel, back with you for the first of what will be many NFL offseason pods, which you will find right here in the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast feed. Hopefully you're watching along on YouTube, on Twitter, wherever you find us. If you are, make sure you're subscribed, of course, to the RotoWire YouTube channel, and feel free to chime in the comments as we roll along. Joe, we'll be doing this every Tuesday or Wednesday, fitting our schedule, fitting the news, perhaps, throughout the NFL offseason. And obviously a lot to get to. We just had the Rams officially releasing Cooper Kupp in the last hour or so. Your guy, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, landing with the Seattle Seahawks. So we'll talk through all the fantasy relevant signings. If there's a big defensive signing that we want to get to, we could, of course, talk about it. But we'll try to keep this as fantasy relevant as we can. Before we get into that, though, we are brought to you by two great sponsors, both Edge Boost and Pool Genius. Have you ever had your credit card declined or you had to call your bank at 3 a.m. in Vegas? Edge Boost is the first consumer-facing online bank dedicated to the gaming industry. There are a ton of benefits to using Edge Boost, including $250K per day in debit deposits, unlimited withdrawals, cash back on sports betting, DFS, sweeps, deposit $25, you get $25, 100% approval for all gaming activity, financial segmentation for discretion and responsible gaming. It's compatible today for just about everything. Prediction markets, iCasino, DFS, sports betting, lottery, brick and mortar casinos, horse racing, sweeps, you name it. No transaction reviews or account freezes. Go to edgeboost.bet today and use our promo code ROTOPOD. That is code ROTOPOD over at edgeboost.bet. And it's time for Pool Genius, man. I mean, it's March, right? We got big golf tournaments coming up. We got March Madness coming up. Football pools just around the corner. Even if it's like 5 months away, to me, that counts as just around the corner. Pool Genius gives you data-driven picks and strategies to outsmart the competition. We're talking over a decade worth of analytics and historical data. Pool Genius is the only site dedicated exclusively to helping people win sports pools. With Pool Genius, users report winning three times more often than expected. And RotoWire listeners get exclusive offers. Just go to poolgenius.com/RotoWire for up to 55% off, or you can just start a 4-day free trial. That's poolgenius.com/RotoWire. All right. Got that out of the way, Joe. We are off and running. I want to start with some Najee Harris talk. All right. We've had a lot of quarterback movement. We've had some big receiver movement. Haven't heard that much talk about Najee Harris, but obviously this is huge for fantasy purposes. Doesn't necessarily preclude the LA Chargers from still adding another running back in free agency, maybe addressing it later in the draft. Probably takes them out of the Ashton Jeanty market, I would imagine. When I checked yesterday, I think they were still 18-1 to draft Ashton Jeanty. We'll certainly talk more about that as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. But your initial reaction to Najee Harris landing with the Chargers?
Yeah, so no Gus Edwards anymore. He was released earlier last week as well to J.K. Dobbins, currently an unrestricted free agent. I guess that's a bit of a spoiler for what we'll talk about with him. But with Najee Harris, you were assuming the Chargers would effectively one-for-one replicate the offense they had last year, but try to do it with better pieces. And whether that be improving Quentin Johnston, we heard rumors about the Chargers being interested in Chris Godwin up into T. Higgins range of receivers, or would that be improving the running back depth chart, whether it be Dobbins or Gus Edwards, maybe adding an interior offensive lineman. There was a lot of ways with the cap space that they really kind of carved out last year for the Chargers to be able to upgrade their offense. And I think this one makes sense. Now, it was reported as a 1-year, $9.5 million contract. All the funny money stuff comes out the day afterwards. The agents all look better because we got Najee Harris, $10 million. It's actually more like 1 year, $5 million with $4.5 million in incentives. And I think that matters a lot because last year Gus Edwards was a 1 year, $3 million signing, or it was effectively a 2 year, $6 million, so 1 for 3. And if you think about the inflation cost a little bit that we've seen in the NFL, it's like the Chargers are 1-for-1 viewing Najee Harris as Gus Edwards. And I think this is really, really important because if it is just Gus Edwards, but in the Chargers offense, yeah, Najee Harris is going for 1,000+ yards. But I think people are going to see Najee Harris, his cumulative body with the Steelers, and then assume, oh, well, he's going to clearly be the number one back. And if the Chargers were to add someone, I agree with you, they're going to. If they add someone, it'll more just be like the Kamani Vidal day 3 sort of level picks. And in this running back draft class, which we'll talk about over the coming weeks here in the offseason, that will be really good. But I would not be shocked at all if either the Chargers end up bringing back J.K. Dobbins on a relatively cheap deal or signing someone like an Austin Eckler, a pass-catching running back that would really complement Najee Harris, or what I believe will happen, both signing a veteran running back that does the J.K. Dobbins stuff and drafting either the Najee Harris replacement or the Dobbins replacement. Like, this draft class of running backs is going to be so insane that if the Chargers double dip and sign Najee Harris, it's still going to be tremendous value. So I'm going to make the case right now that while he is technically the biggest winner of this offseason frenzy, which has not really been that big for skill position guys, I'm ready to move Najee Harris today if somebody's able to give me any sort of value from a dynasty perspective. And you might be able to draft him in round 5 if you're doing best balls. You and I are probably like a month away from really getting to the best ball side of things. But if you're doing best balls, I think his price today is going to be dramatically different and probably an overreach than what we're going to see in 3 or 4 weeks.
I'm already hitting the best balls over at Underdog, by the way. So speak for yourself, pal. I had to sneak it. I had a couple flights last week, and then, had the rare instance where I actually had free Wi-Fi on the flight. And I'm like, what better way to burn 3 hours here than by jumping in a best ball draft? So what grouping of running backs are we talking here as far as where you think Najee Harris's ADP is ultimately going to settle? And by settle, I mean offseason best ball ADP, more so than trying to ask you to predict where he's going to be in late August.
Yeah, so I would answer the question a bit better. Last year, DeAndre Swift, Tony Pollard. It would have been also, I guess, Tajay Spears in that same range. Najee Harris was ironically also in that round 7 or 8 in a redraft scenario. And I think maybe that'd be different on the best ball platforms. But I'm thinking your friends and family league, if this were on ESPN or Yahoo, those guys were around 7 or 8. Then there was that tier above it, which was really just James Conner and Aaron Jones. Joe Mixon at one point in late August kind of elevated to another tier above that. I think you're going to see Najee Harris fall value-wise, like where I would want to take Najee Harris in that 6th to 7th round range in a redraft where Aaron Jones and James Conner were going. And I wouldn't be surprised right now today. Again, I haven't taken any flights recently. Thanks Southwest for removing any sort of interest in or option for me lately to do so. I haven't taken any flights, but you could probably tell me better. If Najee Harris is going above that, let's just say round 5, I'm a little bit nervous because I would not be surprised at all if there's going to be multiple investments in that position, given how much that Jim Harbaugh cares about what the running attack looks like with those guys. So again, this is more of a PSA for people who have Najee Harris in dynasty leagues. This is the best time. Tomorrow will be the next best time, but you will not have much longer to be able to sell Najee Harris, I think, at what's going to be his peak value since he was drafted day 1 by the Steelers.
Do you think he settles perhaps in that same range as someone like a James Conner, Isaiah Pacheco, something like that?
If he does, I'm going to answer. If he does, that's a mistake. I would much rather have Pacheco. I would assume the Chiefs are going to add at least one other guy. I liked that Elijah Mitchell signing, which somebody in the chat was joking. We were talking about Ashton Doolin set level signings. I didn't think so, but I do like Elijah Mitchell to the Chiefs as a backup option. Otherwise, like, I think James Conner is really good. I also think Trey Benson's really good, who's their backup right now. And the Cardinals had signed Conner to kind of a lucrative underreported deal late last year, which will keep him on the team for at least another season. If that's the case, I'm assuming that Najee Harris is not going to be able to fulfill the value of a guy like Pacheco or James Conner.
I think there's going to be a bump because of the way that the way that people think about the Chargers offense, right? Where it's like, oh, all they do is run the ball. And they ran the ball at a high rate. They were I think they were 10th in the NFL in run percentage last year. But yeah, I think there was that overwhelming narrative, especially early in the season. It's like Jim Harbaugh, all he wants to do is run the ball. Didn't necessarily have the ideal personnel to do that. We'll see how much that changes by the time we get to week 1. But they also went out and got Najee Harris, right? It's not like they're just like, all right, well, I guess we'll just settle for him. Like Najee Harris was a targeted ad.
Yeah, but that's right. Go back to the 1 year $5 million with $4 million in incentives is not much different than 2 years for $6 million for Gus Edwards last year.
Sure.
And I think that sort of archetype of running back, I'm not trying to talk over you necessarily, but that archetype of running back will be available and also cheap. Let's just say there's a certain cover boy of the college football game, Donovan Edwards, who's going to be available in the draft. Former Michigan guy, does a lot of that same stuff that Jim Harbaugh knows he wants. And again, 1 year for $5 million with $4 million in incentives is a lot different than 1 year for $10 million, which was sort of reported. So I think that's really the key difference in how the Chargers are looking at things. And again, the role that was most effective running with the Chargers was not the Gus Edwards role last year. It was the J.K. Dobbins role. And I wouldn't be surprised, again, if they either bring back Dobbins or draft a guy to be Dobbins. That's the running back that I would much rather have.
All right, let's talk a little Rams here, Joe, because that is the most prescient news right now. And we are, of course, live. So if you're listening to this in podcast form, make sure you check us out on social media or on the RotoWire YouTube channel. You can follow along live. You can watch the archive version over on YouTube. We knew this move was coming, right? We knew Cooper Kupp was not going to be a member of the LA Rams. My guess is that they gauged the trade market for as long as they could and just didn't really find anything overly appealing out there. So Cooper Kupp officially released. You basically do a 1-for-1 swap here, right? You bring in a player of similar age, almost the exact same cost as Cooper Kupp, but in my mind, a pretty significant upgrade at this point in Davante Adams. I'm not saying Cooper Kupp's got nothing left in the tank, but very different second halves of the season when you compare Davante Adams to Cooper Kupp. I think there's a lot of reason to be optimistic about Davante Adams playing opposite Puka Nacua in that offense. What do we think happens with Cooper Kupp? I know the Packers are on the list. The Jaguars may be on the list as well. Is there an obvious landing spot that you're hoping for fantasy purposes?
Yeah, neither of those teams would interest me. I'm really surprised on Jacksonville, especially after the Diami Brown signings. I think that's kind of the role that I would assume Cooper Kupp would have. Maybe Brown plays more on the outside. Don't have to use in the slot.
Yeah.
Either way, the idea of Cooper Kupp having some sort of fantasy value that's tangent is, I think, kind of remote. And the NFL market would seem to reflect that too. Now, if he's in New England, for example, and there's just literally nobody else, fine. That would be a lot like the Browns, Amari Cooper from a couple of years ago, where you're like, okay, well, this passing situation stinks and they don't really have any other options, but Amari Cooper is still a really good receiver. And I think Cooper Kupp at this point of his career is still a good receiver. He's just not the triple crown threat that he was a couple of years ago. And the bigger deal for me is that I think the Matthew Stafford relationship and trust that he had in Cooper Kupp makes that far more of made Cooper Kupp far more of a better receiver than what otherwise his skill set would reflect. I'm not trying to knock Cooper Kupp necessarily.
Like knocking Cooper Kupp, Joe.
Correct. Yeah. No disrespect, then it becomes very disrespectful when saying it. He's just an older receiver who already was relatively slow entering the draft, has had a multitude of injuries. There has to be a right system where he becomes a factor, other than this being a DeAndre Hopkins going to the Ravens, Titans, whatever else, like 4 stages too late in his career. That's where I feel like we're heading. The one offense that I would really like to see Cooper Kupp in, though, and it'd be kind of funny given that they already traded for Deebo Samuel, would be the Commanders. You think about how quick that passing attack has been, a lot of the bubble screens, also the reliance on the blocking, which we know Cooper Kupp is really good at. That's an offense where you're still allowing Terry McLaurin to do Terry McLaurin things. I think Deebo Samuel and Cooper Kupp kind of end up protecting one another, that their role in that offense would be sort of the same and would protect in the event that both those guys get injured. And you can afford that if you're the Commanders, because you've missed out on a lot of other high priority guys. So that's the one spot where Cooper Kupp goes to Washington. I would say, all right, as a 5th or 6th round receiver in redraft, I might consider that if we're assuming he's going to get X amount of targets. But then you also have to figure, will Austin Eckler come back? Will there be dump downs to the running backs like there was so much last year? Or is it really going to be an elevation of Jaden Daniels passing the ball, which I think is the appropriate thing to do to make sure Jaden Daniels continues to remain healthy and be a factor for that offense? But, you know, we saw this with RG3 not too long ago. You do what you can to win football games, even if it means kind of putting your quarterback at risk. And that's always my biggest concern with Jaden Daniels. So I'm hoping Cooper Kupp goes to Washington, if nothing else, to elevate and give a higher floor to that team while protecting Jaden Daniels.
Could I sell you on a couple AFC West destinations? The Denver Broncos or the Las Vegas Raiders?
Yeah, the Raiders one, actually, I wouldn't mind either if we're thinking the 5th or 6th round, because the only issue is that Brock Bowers effectively does the same thing. Jacoby Myers, that's a 1-for-1 redundancy in my mind, and they don't really have any sort of downfield threat. And would that make the Raiders less interested in drafting or acquiring one? You would think no, but yet the Bills continue to go triple down on let's not stretch the field at all by sending Josh Palmer to that 3-year, $36 million deal a couple of days ago. Like, there are some teams that just sort of choose to have that grittiness, and I think that would be a massive mistake if you have Geno Smith as your quarterback. So not so much the Raiders unless you think Jacoby Myers is done or you could get something in trade for him, and I think you actually could, depending on this market. The Broncos one's interesting, though. I am by no means a fan of Bo Nix and by no means a fan of Sean Payton. So I ate a lot of crow throughout most of last year. But if that's the case, and we're seeing a scenario where you have Cortland Sutton and then, I don't know, Evan Ingram or some other tight end that the Broncos might draft, I kind of like Cooper Kupp in that instance to provide that offense. But there is really very few teams where I'm ready to draft him at what I would imagine a lot of just like the normal folks or people who are trickling in late July, August, like, oh, Cooper Kupp, he was great a couple of years with the Rams. I'll take him around 5, or like ESPN auto drafts around there. There's not many spots where I'd really be considering Cooper Kupp at that level anymore.
All right, let's talk a little bit about some of the other moves that we saw. And, Chris Godwin ends up coming back to Tampa Bay, Joe. Not as much fanfare around this one as somebody as a Jaguars fan. I was hoping, maybe they could pry him away. There were some reports out there that Chris Godwin took less money to remain in Tampa Bay. One of my favorite players, somebody I'm actually optimistic he'll be able to recover. I mean, dealing with a bone injury as opposed to, something that like Brandon Ayuk, for example, is coming back from, multiple tears in that knee. As bad as that looked, it tends to be a better recovery outlook than tearing up your knee or tearing up your Achilles. What did you make of Chris Godwin back at Tampa Bay? Buccaneers at least keeping this core together for one more year.
Yeah, I think it says a lot that when we think about the biggest winners of the fantasy offseason or right now during free agency, Najee Harris, who I also wasn't really fond of, and then Chris Godwin are the leading ladies for this. Yeah, the Godwin is going to be tremendous provided he's healthy and returning to form, or whatever that form might look like for him. And I would assume, again, I agree with you. I assume it's going to be what happens. While it looked like a gnarly injury, it doesn't necessarily mean that Chris Godwin can't fully recover in the same way that somebody who tears their ACL might not be able to over a full year. Baker Mayfield has a lot of trust in him in this offense, despite changing offensive coordinators, typically will too. And provide Chris Godwin stays in the slot, this feels like one of the biggest wins, because if he goes to New England, fine, he might be the preferred target for Drake May, and I kind of like Drake May. I have lots of reservations as to what that offense will look like successfully. If he went to Jacksonville, no disrespect to your team, but I would have some concerns because Brian Thomas should be a target hog. If the Jaguars invest in another first round or highly drafted receiver, they should also have a lot of targets there. Chris Godwin wouldn't be an 120 target, possibly a 90 catch guy like he will be pretty much guaranteed for the Buccaneers offense if he's healthy. So that he takes less money is awesome. That he also has identified, I'm going to stay with a team that knows me and that I know them, and got paid what I think is still an appropriate value coming off a very serious injury. Godwin's one of the bigger winners. Like, I would much rather take Chris Godwin, whatever his ADP is, as opposed to Cooper Kupp. And I would rather do the same for if and when Stephon Diggs signs, or if Amari Cooper signs as well too. And I think that might not have been the conventional thought 2 weeks ago. It was kind of Godwin grouped alongside those players in a lot of spots. And I think he's clearly in a better fantasy situation than anybody else.
All right, let's talk some Seattle, Joe. Obviously bringing in Sam Darnold, sending out Geno Smith. Before we even rope Marquez Valdes-Scantling into the mix, because it feels like he's kind of the queen on the chessboard here that will kind of impact really the rest of the roster. Just initial thoughts on how the absence of DK Metcalf impacts Jackson Smith and Jigba, because I think you can look at this two ways. Right? You could say, JSN officially felt like mid-season, maybe even earlier, overtook DK Metcalf as the guy in that wide receiver core. But, Metcalf was, despite playing through injuries, was mostly out there throughout the year. And there's still something to be said for the attention that he commands. Now you take him away, new offensive coordinator for the second year in a row for Jackson Smith and Jigba, new quarterback, a lot of moving pieces. And yet you look at that depth chart, and even after the MBS addition, there is nobody. There is nobody other than JSN.
Yeah, I think the agent for MVS has already sent you the check in the mail, Nick, so you don't really have to keep kind of pushing that narrative. I had to mention him 5 times, yep. Oh, okay. All right. Well, now that we've hit that, we're set. 1 year, $5.5 million. There hasn't been the reported details on that. I would be willing to bet it's close to the league minimum, and then probably $2 million in incentives for a veteran receiver. That's fine. The Seahawks are going to draft a receiver either in the first or second round. If they end up taking that Texas receiver Golden, I wouldn't be shocked at all. And that would be the MVS actual replacement to that offense. I'm not really a huge fan of Geno Smith, or at least I'm not on the same way that I think like Mina Kimes, for example. I know she's a Seahawks fan, but I think she's incredibly smart and also really talented with this analytical stuff. I don't share the same optimism that a lot of folks do in that sort of area and expertise in the NFL with Geno Smith. I look at a guy that, while is a quality quarterback and I think top 20 in the NFL, really doesn't elevate you much higher than that. He's not going to win you many playoff games, and that's not great analysis, but it also feels like the truth. So that the Seahawks chose to move on from him, get a third round pick, not pay him $45 million, That's a win. Except it feels like you're running that back with Sam Darnold, and you're kind of trying to thread this needle where you want to be competitive enough, but also retool and kind of go cheaper at some of these positions. And maybe it'll work out. I would probably not choose to do it. But if the idea is, and we talk about this with the NBA all the time, be the Chicago Bulls, which is what the Seahawks possibly were heading to with a $30 million a year DK Metcalf and a $45 million Geno Smith. I don't want to be that. I don't want to be fighting for a wild card spot and really doing nothing else for 3 or 4 years. I would rather go the process level 76ers, complete retool. Let's get a lot of picks. You can't do that in a 53-man NFL roster. Like it's just not as easily or capable to do that. I know your Jacksonville Jaguars have tried numerous times to be that bad.
They've been doing that for 15 years.
Yeah, right. That is not by choice. Whereas the process 76ers are very deliberate in doing so. So this is going to be really curious to see, like, is it a day 2 receiver? This receiver class is not very good. With the Seahawks trade up for Ted McMillan, who really actually would be an interesting replacement for DK Metcalf. Obviously not a similar body type because nobody is, but what he would provide as a field stretcher, and I still think a good jump ball getter in that regard, and doesn't have attitude questions nearly as much as DK Metcalf does. That's key, but all of the centers around JSN. And I did the very first Sirius XM mock draft of 2025, or at least it was advertised as such. And I think JSN went top 32. I kind of raised my eyebrows at the time. So, man, it's pretty high for a guy that I don't think really maxed out more than 1,200 yards and 100 catches in a really, really good season. Now this changes. Now it's a situation where Sam Darnold, I would assume, stays upright enough behind that offensive line and will have effectively nobody else to be a target hog. I don't think Noah Fant is. That running game obviously still reliant on Charbonnet and Kenneth Walker. So JSN probably does become a 3rd round pick, if not a little bit higher, when the helium starts to occur around July and August, because he's a really good receiver, but that offense just might not be enough to sustain anybody else at a fantasy level that I would want to have at.
I mean, how much of this requires assumptions about Sam Darnold? Like, what are the chances that Sam Darnold's a top 10 fantasy quarterback again? In my mind, low. And it's not necessarily about valuing the final 2 games of the season versus the first 15. I don't think that's technically fair, but I think it's also fair to look at Sam Darnold and say, was this not the perfect situation, right? You had finally the perfect head coach, the perfect organization. You get to play with the best receiver in football. You get to play with a really high end number 2 in Jordan Addison. You get TJ Hawkinson back midseason, and you have one really nice weapon in JSN in Seattle. But I asking Sam Darnold to play anywhere close to that level consistently week to week behind what is objectively a worse offensive line is something that we have to at least consider as part of this process.
Worse offensive line, and more importantly, I think a worse scheme caller, right? The Kevin O'Connell clearly has emerged as, if not a top 5 coach in the NFL, certainly a top 10 coach in the NFL. I know the 2 games that the Saints were really good to begin the year were like the Clint Kubiak renaissance, but new offensive scorer for the Seahawks, Kubiak, is not nearly at the level of Kevin O'Connell. Right. So you're right. Is this a scenario where Darnold's going to turn back into a pumpkin? I would have thought that would have happened with Geno Smith a couple times too, and I think he's played with worse offensive situations, or at least comparable to what Darnold's walking into. I don't know if the Seahawks commit the money that they do unless they feel comfortable saying Darnold's going to give you top 20 quarterback numbers, or at least efficiency, in the same way that Geno Smith is. So I'm less concerned about Darnold completely going back to the backup level relevancy that he was for a couple years prior, and more about saying, okay, if he is quarterback 20 as opposed to quarterback 10, what does that mean for really the JSN hype, which I think is going to occur? But the other pieces that will then become a part of that offense. Like in today's NFL, there's going to be at least one target that has fantasy relevance. Again, I go back to a couple of years ago, that Browns offense was really, really bad when Deshaun Watson was suspended / injured. Amari Cooper was still top 20 fantasy receiver. JSN has easily amount of talent to do so. I have questions about everything after that, whether it be MVS, I know, again, checks already in the mail, or more importantly, who they end up drafting in day 2, I would assume is going to get tons of fantasy hype over the coming months.
A couple notes in the chat here. Jamie says, wasn't Godwin the number 1 or number 2 overall receiver last year before the injury? He was number 1 through 6 weeks. And then if you count the game where the injury occurred, which if I recall, that was like in the waning moments of that game. So basically a full game for him. He put up like 13.5 PPR points. So ended up being number 2 in total PPR points behind only Jamar Chase at the time of the injury. And then Michael says Cooper Kupp going to the Giants would be a nice fit and help a rookie QB if the Giants draft Ward or Sanders. Maybe.
Yeah, not Sanders, because I don't think Sanders is very good. And I don't know. I mean, we already saw it with Malik Neighbors a little bit last year where we heard rumblings about the amount of targets he needs to get. If we're going to placate Malik Neighbors, and maybe they should, there's a question to be said. Well, Brian Dable and Joe Shane won't be back next year, theoretically, in this situation. Let's make sure we make the one thing that's good for our offense good for the next couple of years, keep them happy. I don't like that scenario because I think Cooper Kupp is going to be asked to do too much and also have too much centered around him with Blake Neighbors and everything else. There's only a few spots. I think we listed probably all of them, whether it be the Broncos or the Commanders, that I would feel like that's a guy that makes sense for his where his fantasy value will lie on name recognition down the road.
All right, we've delayed it long enough, Joe. Let's talk some Javonte Williams winding up with the Dallas Cowboys as they just continue to load up in that running back room. I think this spells the end of the Rico Dowdle era, an explosive era in Dallas running back lore. Yeah, I mean, this isn't even lower tier signing than Najee Harris. I mean, we're talking about as close to the minimum as it gets for Javonte Williams. You can make like $500,000 in incentives, but this is a low dollar contract. Like we said about Najee Harris, I don't think this really precludes Dallas from making other additions. I don't think this is the final running back room by any means.
Yeah, so 1 year, $3 million signing for Javonte Williams. Jerry Jones, again, all in, just like he was last offseason with these crazy deals. Good for the Cowboys and their fans. Rico Dowdle is an unrestricted free agent. He could come back. There was talk about interest in that. Dowdle, I mean, went for over 1,000 yards, or at least 1,000 yards combined last year. But I think it was very clear to everyone who had eyes that Dowdle was not a really relevant running back. And I made the case in a video that will soon be published here on the RotoWire Fantasy Network saying this upcoming draft class, and Mario and I talked about this on SiriusXM at the end of February-ish when we were doing a lot of the draft stuff. It's going to be generational. I think there are at least 14 guys that if they're not drafted by the end of day 2, will be one of the very first selections in round 4 or round 5. Like we're going to have at least 14 new running backs that come in and are going to be critical factors for the team, or at least have the draft capital invested in that. Yes, the Ravens will probably draft somebody to back up Derrick Henry, yada, yada. But the idea is if there are 14 new and good and highly coveted by teams running backs in there, that like third tier of the Deonta Foreman's and Royce Freeman's that we've seen kind of float around, they're gone. They're just going to be Thanos level snapped, evaporated. They are not going to be a part of any NFL rotations on practice squads. And I think Dowdle's going to be in that. So if you can get even a 4th round pick in Dynasty right now for Rico Dowdle, great, do so. Because I would be shocked in 6 months if he is anything but a distant memory in the same way that Marion Barber is to me when he was in the Cowboys a number of years ago. I know you loved Marion Barber too. You all did.
For some reason, I love those Minnesota teams, the Maroney Barber duos that gave Wisconsin quite a bit of trouble back in like 2006. I want to talk some Vikings real quick, Joe.
Well, hold on. We didn't even get to the Javonte Williams part of it.
Okay,
like,
I think
the Cowboys are going to draft somebody else, like you'd said, and if you have a chance to trade Javonte Williams, just in the same way I was saying with Najee Harris, do so, because whoever the Cowboys draft, whether it be in the 1st or 2nd round, I'm assuming early 2nd round, they are going to be the starter right away. Maybe they share time with Javonte Williams. Maybe it's a little bit of a split, like a 60-40 split in favor of the rookie. Yeah. But there are at least 5 guys, whether it be Judkins, whether it be Omari and Hampton, obviously Genty's in play as well too. You could go down to Iowa's Caleb Johnson as well, that can shoulder a 3-down workload, but also seed the passing down and pass blocking work to Javonte Williams. It's a good signing. I think that's actually objectively a good one, as much as we were mocking the Cowboys. But from a fantasy perspective, that Javonte Williams is your lone starter for Dallas right now is the opportune time to take advantage in Dynasty if you can.
All right, let's talk some Vikings, Joe. And I'm just going to ask you straight up. Is this as simple as it appears? Is it just JJ McCarthy time? Is there any sort of bridge that will be necessary here?
There's a lot of these guys that are now gone. I did not believe for a second the Daniel Jones stuff. If he actually mattered, that he was on the practice squad for the duration of the end of last season, we would have seen more to that. There have been more smoke and rumors other than it felt very clearly Daniel Jones's camp being like, hey, guys, don't forget me. I'm here doing practice squad stuff. I was a starter once. It's like, okay, just shut up. And that he's going to be the starter for the Colts makes a little difference to me, or competing, I should say, with Anthony Richardson in that whatever. I am shocked that the Vikings are going to effectively walk into the season without any sort of backup or safety net for a team that was one win away from getting the number 1 seed in the NFC. That's a lot lying on JJ McCarthy's shoulders to be any level of competence. Like we talked about Sam Darnold earlier, the Seahawks. Obviously, those last 2 games weren't great, but he was a really good quarterback and a difference maker and made smart decisions. To just expect JJ McCarthy, who was already the rawest of the rookie quarterbacks last year, to do so off of effectively no practice or training other than mental reps, that seems like a really, really risky endeavor to me. But guys like Tyrod Taylor are gone. Maybe you could sign a Joe Flacco or Kirk Cousins. That'd be ironic if he came back, like some veteran stopgap. But I think the Browns are going to be in that market because Kenny Pickett is not going to just do it for you if that's the case. So there's very quickly evaporating resources to be able to have a backup quarterback. And unless they do the signing Ben Roethlisberger, Phillip Rivers endeavors, or whatever, these 45-year-old veterans, it would make me incredibly nervous to say JJ McCarthy is going to be the guy. But from a fantasy perspective, it's probably a big win, right? Like we know McCarthy can run, that he has Jordan Addison, that he has a really retooled offensive line. I think the signings they did make this season or this offseason were great. Frustratingly so as a Packer fan. Aaron Jones is back. They're going to draft another running back too, I'd assume in the 5th round with one of their 2 5th-round picks. That's going to be a really good team, provided McCarthy is anywhere close to Sam Darnold level quarterback. And to be clear, I don't know if he can be, because again, Darnold was good last year. But I would be very nervous among the Vikings and Viking fans, given how close they were last season to making a big run.
Well, the market is not really reflecting that in terms of the betting market, I should say. Vikings 4-1 to win the NFC North. So markedly behind Detroit, behind Green Bay, who's at plus 285, same odds as the Chicago Bears. Could this be a Russell Wilson landing spot?
That's a really good one. I don't know if Russell Wilson has the intermediate to short game quick throws that I thought Sam Darnold really excelled with last season. Right. Not that Russell Wilson can't process things and make a quick decision, but the best part of Russell Wilson is those moon balls, is those deep throws. And I actually kind of think with the trade for DK Metcalf that it would be best for Russell Wilson to go back to Pittsburgh. Doesn't sound like that's going to happen, but that might be the best spot. And truthfully, if the Steelers are to sign Aaron Rodgers, we're doing this podcast midday Tuesday. It seems like very, very soon we're going to get some sort of news on Aaron Rodgers and likely signing with the Steelers. But if that goes sideways, Rodgers would be like the perfect stopgap, I think, too, in the scenario that JJ McCarthy doesn't. Yes, he completes the holy trifecta of Brett Favre. There is irony to that. I will also be very upset if that occurs as a Packer fan. I don't know the correct word for it. And I like Rodgers far more than I did Brett Favre at this point of their careers. I have far more fond memories of Aaron Rodgers, but that will be less so if he chooses to sign with the Vikings. I understand why, if that's the case, because they're kind of the last team standing, although I guess the Giants could too. But yeah, I think it's going to be McCarthy. And if it's going to be Trey Lance as the backup or somebody like that, there are very few and far between veteran guys that are really going to be that stopgap for them. Question to you. I don't know if this is the case in NFL the way as the NBA. I think Blake Griffin missed his entire rookie year, if I'm not mistaken, then was the rookie of the year winner the following year. We had Chet Holmgren do the same thing. Can JJ McCarthy be eligible to win rookie of the year because he did not play at all last season? Because if that is a betting option, I like that a ton more than a Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, or anybody else.
That's a great question. I don't know. We don't have offensive rookie of the year odds up right now. I would imagine though, because he didn't play whatsoever, and because he was on IR for the entire year. Like it's different if you're like an active player and you're just not seeing the field, right? But if you're literally not a part of the active roster for the entire season, I don't know. A great question, Joe. A great question that we will answer on the next episode when we have hopefully offensive rookie of the year odds up. On Rodgers, by the way, we are recording this on Wednesday afternoon. The Jets are planning to release Rodgers after 4 p.m. today. So at which point I would imagine we will have a flurry of reports coming in. I still think Pittsburgh by far the most likely landing spot. Giants maybe still sniffing around. Who knows on Minnesota? Like if you're the Vikings, just why? Like why go down this path? I don't,
I would
even from
agree.
a Packers perspective, like it's different than Favre, right? I don't know if it would be frustrating. Certainly. I think there would be a lot of Packers fans that are up in arms, but I still think they would overall look at the situation and say, we are glad we made the decision that we did. We are happy where we are. There's no jealousy here. I think Rodgers has also proven that as much as he may think he has 2 more years left in the tank, like if you're looking at this from the Packers perspective, you're not shaking in your boots thinking, oh man, now we got to play Aaron Rodgers twice this year.
Yeah, you're right. I had said Tuesday, we're recording Wednesday. I've gotten lost in the sauce here with all the different offseason moves and fake free agency starting, but actually really did here on Monday stuff. So yeah, recording Wednesday. It would be the vibes thing. Like if you're the Vikings, really kind of upstart team, weren't supposed to be where they were. I wasn't even projecting them to hit their over under on their win total of 7.5 last year, and they kind of cruised by that by like week 8. You wouldn't want to have that unless you're really concerned with JJ McCarthy. And I would almost say if the Vikings were to sign a veteran of that caliber, whether it be Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers, people are gonna be like, "Oh, it's a great, smart choice. You got to do that." Especially again, like what I was just saying, you're 1 win away. That would be a really big red flag that either JJ McCarthy has not progressed from a mental perspective, or that from an injury part of things. Again, he had a second surgery, which kind of goes underreported. That he's not recovering well from that. Like that, it would be enough of a red flag for me, raising my eyebrow a little bit for the best ball leagues right now, redraft. But right now, as it stands, I would be drafting him kind of like quarterback 20, and I bet you he's well outside that range right now. He's probably more like quarterback 24-ish. Like if that's the case, I want McCarthy every time.
All right, we got a super chat from our guy, Michael. He says, do the Cowboys have enough draft capital to trade up with Vegas at pick 6 to get Ashton Genty? And then a second question, where and do you think Pickens will get traded away? So basically, do you think George Pickens will get traded? And if so, where would make sense? But we'll start on the Genty question.
Yeah, the Pickens one's interesting. I'll be excited to come back to that. So yes, right. So I think the Cowboys pick 12 to get up to 6 with Vegas I would assume on the chart be something like a second this year and then either a third round next year, or you flip the 2 around. So it depends on which one of those charts, but I kind of remember things correctly. That's how that would look. It would be a matter of if the Cowboys want to do that. And I think they really were successful with Ezekiel Elliott. Like you can, especially at that time period, taking Zeke as high as they did, everyone was kind of chastising that. But I thought that was the correct move to get one of the premium players. It's the same exact concept where Genty is going to be among a lot of the draft pundits, a top 10 prospect, not at his position, not offensively, top 10 prospect. But I think the Cowboys are far away, from being in contention, and especially look at the division now with the Eagles winning the Super Bowl, the Commanders making it to the NFC Championship game. I don't think their outlooks changed negatively dramatically. The Cowboys are going to be clearly third in that division, fighting for one of the last playoff spots. And now with all the contracts that are coming due, whether it be CeeDee Lamb, whether it be Dak Prescott, who they just kind of did the funny money stuff a couple days ago to extend some more money. Micah Parsons, if he were to get moved or trade, I don't think so. You have Travion Diggs as well too. There's a lot of these big deals that you have to now be smarter with. Like you need to improve the offensive line. That's not cheap anymore. If you watch any of the interior offense line guys get signed, and you're going to need more secondary pieces over the coming years. That can get revitalized by draft picks. Not spending $7.5 million on a top 10 running back while he might be really, really good, as opposed to just drafting. I'm not going to say Amari and Hampton in round 2, but another level of running back in the second round who is $6 million cheaper and can produce at 80% the level of Genty. So I don't think they should trade up for him, and I don't think they will from a draft pick perspective.
There's almost no argument to me that it would make sense for the Cowboys to do this. But if the question is, do they have the draft capital to do it? They probably do. I mean, if you're willing to put enough on the table, right? I mean, they have obviously their top 3 round picks this year. They don't have a 4th, but they have 4 5th rounders, including 3 comp picks. And then obviously you could start dipping into future picks as well. So, I mean, it's doable. It's doable. It's just not advisable, I think is what we're saying.
Yeah.
All right. So on to George Pickens, Joe. Do you think there's a chance that he is traded after the DK Metcalf move? And if so, who would be interested?
Yeah, I actually kind of think at the time when DK was traded to the Steelers, I was surprised. I thought for sure he'd go to the Patriots, who would have had plenty of money to invest in him, have a need at receiver. You have Drake May as a young quarterback. I was really surprised at the Steelers of all places. And it's largely because it feels like DK Metcalf and George Pickens are redundant to one another.
Yes.
I mean, that's the best skill set of DK Metcalf is that he can be a deep threat, that he is an intimidating presence when you're throwing a long ball like Russell Wilson will be doing. And I think George Pickens is best with that as well. Like his jump ball skills are, I think, one of the best in the NFL. And that was one of those things coming out of college that's the best case scenario for Pickens, and it's played out through the first 2 years. So if in that regard, yeah, I mean, I wanted the Packers, and this is not just a Packer fan, I wanted the Packers to trade for DK Metcalf because he would be a better version of Christian Watson. Did I want to give him a second round pick and $30 million? No, but I do think that's kind of the cost of doing business right now with the receiver position. George Pickens would also be an improvement over Christian Watson, who again won't play this entire year. The attitude issues are the one concern that I have. That was one of the reasons why he fell to where he did in the second round a couple of years ago. It doesn't seem like it's went away at all. We have lots of different Twitter clips of effort in relation to blocking and everything else. And I do think if you're the Steelers who would trade away George Pickens for, let's just say, a 4th or 5th round pick, or just trying to see what this offense can look like with both those guys, and then I would assume a slot receiver or something else to improve that intermediate besides Pat Freiermuth, I would probably go that direction. And in a year or two, if this Pickens thing doesn't work out, well, it's fine. There really isn't any loss to it as opposed to just a day 3 pick. So I don't think Pickens moves. And I would assume a team like the Packers wouldn't be interested in doing it. It would maybe be the Patriots again, who I think just have such a need at receiver and an alpha receiver, or what could be qualified as one, that they'll go ahead and kind of pay the price, the ante for that. But I don't think Pickens moves.
Was on the final year of his rookie deal, right? So there is kind of an impetus on Pittsburgh to make a decision one way or the other. Michael throws out the Kansas City Chiefs as a potential landing
Nick,
spot.
you would be a good receiver for the Chiefs right now. I mean,
I don't think I
would.
Be a good receiver. I don't think I would. Small hands, really small hands. Like NFL size football is just no chance I'm catching that thing from Mahomes. Chiefs are a team that came to mind just because they're willing to take those kind of risks. The other teams that I was kind of thinking about as you were talking, Carolina, New England, Jacksonville, the Raiders. The Raiders have a long history of loving players like George Pickens.
He would be a good Raider. That's a good call. Yes.
Yeah.
He would stretch the field too. You're right. Again, what's the draft capital that you're getting for George Pickens? Like if it's a day 2 pick, like if you're just swapping second rounders, you got to consider it.
Yeah, but the implication is you're then signing him to an extension.
Right. And I don't know. Does he get less than Devontae Adams? Does he get like 4-year, $20 million deal for Pickens? I would say yes. That would be the right choice. I don't think he gets more than DK Metcalf.
No, not more than Metcalf, but I think it's in the neighborhood.
Okay, yeah, if it's in the neighborhood that's really tough.
People want to get the talent in the door, man.
In free agency, you pay for what you want the player to be, not what they are. So in that regard, that would make sense for George Pickens. But yeah, no, I see that Michael in the chat saying LaFleur could straighten out Pickens' attitude. Absolutely not. I don't think LaFleur can like scold his children the way that he seems to let some of these guys for the Packers get out of hand, much less a guy like George Pickens. No, a Raider makes a lot more sense to me. Not so much in any of the other spots.
We do have our answer, by the way. Thank you to Jamie in the chat doing the legwork on this. He says, no, a sophomore NFL player is not eligible for the Rookie of the Year award, even if they spend their entire rookie season on IR. The NFL defines a rookie as a player in their first season of participation, meaning that if they were on the active roster or IR during their first year, it still counts as their rookie season. So unfortunately, your JJ McCarthy Rookie of the Year bet is dead.
Can we bet comeback player of the year then, Nick? You know I'm always trying to find a way to make financial gains of this. Can you come back if you never played? You know how dumb they do with some of these comeback player of the year stuff. If you've never actually played in the NFL, can you come back? We'll have to see.
Yeah. Comeback player of the year has become like a weirdly hot betting market too, which it's not even out yet for next season. There was like 15 legit candidates this past year. All right, Joe, we're running long here. Is there anything else you want to hit before we get out of here?
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of the big ones. I guess in my mind, one of the bigger losers is J.K. Dobbins in the event that he does not sign back with the Chargers. And I'll keep reiterating, we're going to be saying this a lot over the next Tuesdays and Wednesdays every time we do the show. This is a generational running back class, a generational rookie running back group. You could see the Royce Freemans and Deonta Foreman's getting pushed out. The Rico Dowdles are going to be pushed out. But that also means every tier falls down. So J.K. Dobbins, who was a top 20 player at his position, I thought last year, and a really crucial reason why the Chargers were in the playoffs this year, could end up getting like a 1 year, $5 million deal again because of the injury concerns, which he did suffer last year, but also dependent on his fit. And there was a point last year with Dobbins where I thought, man, I might have stumbled into some dynasty success where you could have picked him off the scrap heap, a waiver wire deal. And that might have already been gone if he does not choose to come back to the Chargers. And I don't know why necessarily the Chargers would sign him back to a deal. You can get a rookie running back who's going to produce just like Dobbins would, who theoretically has less health concerns for 5 times less money. That's good business sense. So I mentioned Rico Dowdle. I had said I'm trading Najee Harris. I will gladly trade J.K. Dobbins for anything right now in Dynasty because I'm willing to bet that if it's not this year, it's going to be in the year to come where he is out of the league or among the practice squad group of players.
All right, we'll end on this because I just got an alert from Ian Rappaport. Russell Wilson is visiting the Cleveland Browns.
This is not a poop joke at all? That's not what we're doing here?
No, we don't
okay. Because, I mean, we are now in the realm, Nick, with all the social media stuff where any of these guys can get hacked at any point. And if a push notification gets sent out, kind of like that, I wouldn't be surprised. It was only 2 months ago when we thought Luka Doncic was also a push notification trade, and that ended up being true. So there will not be a day or podcast that I don't mention how dumb that was that Nico Harrison did that. So thanks for ruining things for me, Mavericks. I appreciate that.
All right. We will end on that little Dallas Mavericks talk from our guy, Joe Bartel. Joe, very much looking forward to doing this with you throughout the NFL offseason. We'll keep monitoring the best ball markets. We got to get you in some underdogs over these next couple.
It'll be soon for sure.
Obviously, the NFL draft is coming up. It's going to be in your backyard here in the state of Wisconsin. So we'll be providing you with plenty of coverage there. You can still hear plenty of football talk on the RotoWire YouTube channel. You can listen to Joe joining us on the RotoWire flagship Sirius XM show as well, 10 a.m. to noon Central Time, Monday through Friday. I am fighting the good fight, Joe, to get as much football talk on the channel in mid-March as I can, even though it's full-on baseball season over there. But good stuff as always, dude, and we'll chat with you next week.